One day, there was this old guy who looked about 120 years old with a cane that looked like he'd had since he was 2, right? I watch him walk across the park. There's something about the relationship between him and his cane. It's like he's in some sense indwelling in his cane, right? And his cane is indwelling in him, right? There's this
idea of indwelling. And I've tried to make use of that idea when I try to explain sort of participatory knowing, that you indwell something and allow it to indwell you. So it's union through loving. That mutually accelerating indwelling is a kind of love, a kind of intimacy.
You may hear my 6-month-year-old in the background, and my wife stays at home with him all the time, so they're a unit. Like he literally looks like another limb growing out of her, right? In a certain sense, right? And she had to go to the dentist, and so it was just me and him, which is rare. He's got this temperament that's like a Buddha, but he was going through some kind of teething thing, so he would just start crying like crazy out of nowhere. He starts screaming. I'm like, uh-oh, all right, get the bottle. So I put him down on the couch and I run, and he's screaming, and I go into the kitchen, I grab the bottle, and right before I come out, I hear silence. And of course I'm like, whoa. And I go around the corner, and he had just flipped himself over onto the floor. He had never done that before. Right? And I'm of course panicked, and he gets up and he doesn't quite know what's happening, and I pick him up, and he was fine, but it scared him. And I think he just had his first break in reality. And when it dawned on him, this kind of shock, he started to scream at a level I had never heard before. And he looked right into my eyes for about, I'd say, a good 20 minutes. He would scream and like look right in my eyes, and then he'd like lose contact for a second, and then he'd look around and he'd look right in my eyes. And I sit down with him. He won't lose contact with my eyes, and we're doing this thing. And he'd start to fall asleep, and he'd wake up again, and then he'd contact me again, right? This back and forth until finally he fell in. It's like the deepest sleep I'd ever seen in him. And I'm sitting here after this whole experience. The thing that gathers all the aspects of everything that we do as a family that I'm usually lost in dealing with, right? In that moment of silence with him, right? I watched that kind of break for him for a moment, and then come back together. And where he found himself was right here. And it's this kind of feeling of very much like the cane and the old man, right? There was him literally indwelling himself into me, and me into him, right? Like it broke, and I saw the whole thing kind of reorganize in real time. And then that experience just kind of vibrated for a moment. And I felt this sense in which I felt what we both were participating in that was much bigger than both of us. I felt the organizing principle of all that just hover in the air.
Yeah, I think the comparison to the cane is apt. I use that as an example of the transparency opacity shifting. The old man or the blind person is feeling through the cane. They don't feel the cane. They feel through it. But at times, especially if there's a break, if something goes wrong, then they step back and look at the cane, or like I do with my glasses, step back and look at it rather than looking through it. And so that disruption, normally I think you're looking through all of that, and then the disruption means you step back and you're looking at it, and then you get the sense of all of this machinery at work. at so many different levels of our psyche and between our brains and our bodies and between you and another person, and the way evolution and culture and history have all shaped them, and all that machinery just comes in. Yeah, you become aware of it. Those moments are very, very powerful. There's something going on there. What transparency opacity shift is the ability to disclose the underlying organizing principles that give us a participatory sense of an eidos, of the through line, of a structuring patterning. Yeah, that's really good. That's why the mindfulness is such an important thing. That's the Socratic. The Socratic Aporia is like when he fell off the couch. The Socratic Aporia tries to trigger a transparency opacity shift. And it's the shift that discloses the eidos. So Nicholas of Cusa, his learned ignorance is the culmination of the Socratic, I know that I don't know. And it's in that state where you get the disclosure, because it's not a privation. It's like you said, it's a moreness. And then Merleau-Ponty's point that the body is inherently the thing beyond itself, because you don't have a body, you are a body, and yet the body is always a thing beyond itself, because it allows you to be it allows you to directly participate in the way everything is or most things are embodied in the world, and yet, right, it's also something that you are. And so the body is inherently the thing beyond itself. It's your own moreness within yourself, the way you're a thing beyond yourself, that allows you to grok how the object as a thing beyond itself and beyond you, right? Yes, very much, all of that.
Teague, he's 6 months old, right? He had this break, this shock of the realization of separation or something like that. And then he knew where to look to find himself. And I think that reveals something about the way that we are evident to ourselves, with the way that we are given to ourselves. In that,
it's through other people. It's through other people.
Oh, totally.
Kids can't introspect until they're about 4 or 5 years of age.
Totally. That look was this direct peek at where he was, right? Where he yes.
It's in the symposium, right?
Yes.
The other person's eyes are the mirrors by which you see yourself, right?
Yeah, totally. The self that I have it's unlike almost everything else that I deal with in the world, where everything else is pretty much, it presents itself from its own ground. But when I look at me, I'm not presented from my self-evidence from my own ground. I am given over as this inner subjective
totally
self that's not a self-presentation, right?
Yep, Chris and I are going to get into that. In fact, I just got it today, Philosophical Fragments and Johannes Climacus by Kierkegaard, because we're working on the series.
I just bought that yesterday. Yesterday, that very book.
Yeah. Well, there you go, because Chris and I we're preparing a video series on Socrates and Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard is really wrestling with exactly this issue. So for example, John Climacus is all about leaving the world and going into solitude and being by yourself.
Right.
And you can see Kierkegaard is, like, of course, deeply identifying with this and attracted to this, but Kierkegaard also knows, right, how much, right, our self is. The self is a relation to itself, and blah, blah, all that stuff about that we're talking about. What does it mean to become an adult? Teague takes his first step because reality basically hits him when he falls, right? And he realizes that there is something beyond him that is nevertheless can reach to the very depths of him. Simultaneously transcendent to him and immanent to him. And he talked about adulthood as a growing responsiveness and responsibility to this.
Because there's a certain amount of security, right, within the way I organize in my world, right? So I can open up to the world fully. I can open up to being hurt. I can open up to the unknown. I can open up to all these, like, the wonder of things, because there's some sense in which I understand that I can relate to whatever comes up, and that there's something deeply essential that isn't at stake in the matter?
This is, again, a perfect guardian of the Socratic point. One of the things religion should do is take that tacit familiarization of the world and get you to step back and look at it rather than look through it. That's aporia. That's when you realize this, as opposed to thinking it is just the way things are. Like you come to the horizon, you come to the horizon of horror, you come to the horizon point between horror and hope, right? And that's where religion should place you. What I'm trying to get at is aporia makes you step back and realize the vulnerability of the way you've honed things, the way that you have made things familiar.
Yeah.
And religion is designed, when it works, to do exactly that. That apoplectic sense, right? I think the ability to enter into aporia is to disclose something fundamental. People try to avoid the fact that they're being this question. They don't want the transparency, opacity shift, to see the framework, right? To see the vulnerability of the framework. They don't want to see. What is it that allows people? Like, what do people do when they're on that horizon that allows them to be in the question without being consumed by it?
Paint the picture of what would be being consumed by the question.
The bottom drops out. The realization the ground is groundless. The tension between home and horror, right? That's the place of learned ignorance.
Yeah, that's the practice. In some sense, it's to tolerate that aporia in a way
the tension of the aporia.
Yes,
exactly.
All of the, you could say, the procedural knowing that has to be there in the beginning, right? Because it's a way of holding you in that tension, right? As it starts to open up, you can start to have a right relationship with that.
What do I mean by being consumed by the question is you either drop back into home and intend to have an answer, or you are sucked into the horror and you think that there is no intelligibility, there's no logos at all.
But I think it has to do with a voluntarily turning towards it. I think when you're defended against it, or there's a sense that I can't survive it, right? There's a sense where I don't want it. I'm exposed versus vulnerable, right? That's the difference.
Yes.
Family systems talks about the intimacy as a function of your ability to tolerate anxiety, right?
Very much.
And it's
otherness.
And that moments of intimacy are the moments where it looks like what the risk is, if I say the thing that's really true for me, it may lose you, right? But if I don't say it, I'll lose myself. And there's exactly. So if you can't tolerate that anxiety and you're defended against it and you dominate instead, they say like the three ways of not tolerating the anxiety, in other words, moving away from intimacy, is one is you dominate, you just take charge and control everything, or you submit, and I'll just do whatever you want to do, or I'll just dissociate and float on the ceiling, which is my favorite. Or and here's the thing about this, and it's in moments of intimacy, it's something that you choose to turn towards and say.
What do people need to do to be ready for that? There's a readiness for the choice, and I think it's something like, I'm going to pun a little bit here, familiarity with wonder, with actually wondering in the sense of pondering, this understanding that the intimacy that's cultivated has to be put into the service of a deeper wondering. Right?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
The cultivation of philia that can then be turned towards Sophia, the connectedness, and then they get the practice on the wondering with the philosophical fellowship, and then they're ready for the turning.
Yeah.
This is where you're touching paradoxical dwelling as opposed to any kind of knowing, right? Yeah. And this is where learned ignorance takes you. It takes you to something you can't know because it's ultimately about the paradox.
Intimacy is a lot of things. Moments of intimacy is a lot of things, but one thing it isn't is safe, right? However, when you cross that threshold with somebody, you take the risk, right? All of the fears that I have the moment before I cross the line, right? By crossing the line, I become someone different in some regard. If there's a desire that I'm afraid to say, because I'm afraid that the other person could be threatened and I'll be shut out or whatever it is, and then I say it, and I open myself, right? Voluntarily open myself to that vulnerability of whatever happens. Usually things start to happen where my worst fear ends up not being relevant. When you experience that with another person, that creates a genuine sense of safety in the relation as a result of that. You start to have faith in, if I open up in that level, I will transform. There's something beyond what I could know. I become secure in some sense, the wonder. That's the ground. It's not certainty. It's precisely beyond certainty.
Yeah, it's faithfulness rather than what we commonly call faith. I totally agree with that. And I was going to say, that's Teague looking at you. Your faithfulness is based on not a propositional, but an actual encounter with the presence and the receptivity for agape. Teague has a tremendous power. He can, and the verb here is inadequate, but he can receive agape.
Yeah.
Right? That's what turns him to your eyes. Yeah. He can receive agape. He's a receiver. That's no guarantee he'll get it from you.
Yeah.
But there's a receiver, right? And the degree to which we have become persons is because we have been, right, entrusted to agape in a profound way. Right? That's what I meant when he turns. What he turns is, right, the power to receive agape is turning, and there is the power of agape, and they are meeting each other in a profound way. Because these two things really do exist, the power to receive and the power to give agape, and they are always there. And so when you turn to each other, right, I'm thinking of it almost like the positive and negative, of magnets. These two powers are they orient, and then they fit together, they belong together in a powerful way. And I think when you like in a romantic relationship, when the eros and the philia, they can entrust you to that agape. And what you do is you trust in yourself that you have the power to receive agape, or else you wouldn't be there. You couldn't be there as a person.
Yeah.
And you entrust that the other person you're with is capable of giving it.
Yeah.
Right? And the same for them. And then you're touching the very fundaments of how we come to personhood. And the degree to which we trust in the power, this is going to sound like a Hallmark card, but the degree to which we trust in the power of personhood is the degree to which we can be faithful in that situation of high risk.
In fact, you become attracted to it. You become attracted.
You're drawn to it.
Simultaneously attracted to it and more skilled at being attracted to it. It becomes the halos in some sense, right?
Exactly. Think about what your fear is about. Your fear is a threat to your personhood, but in the moment that we're talking about, you can drop to the level of the power that constitutes personhood. That's how you can respond.
Yes.
So you can say, well, I may lose this and this, but as long as I'm in agape, I won't lose personhood.
All those moments of exposure and vulnerability that then, and here's Rilke, right? May the world ripen in my gaze.
Exactly.
Right? Exactly. And it's a gaze it's interesting. It doesn't feel like a gaze that I have, and I'm pointing it out to the world. It feels like a gaze that's continually revealed, that's always already been there, right?
Yeah.
A gaze that you participate in. it's the maturing and the ripening of, well, here it is, not myself as an object, right? But more like this, the realization of the source of myself as the clearing, right? For a world to gather and become what it is. It's like this, how they do it is by learning how to be the one who's facilitating it, which I think,
This is the best way to teach is to learn. The best way to learn is to teach.
Oh, let's listen to it for a second. For me, the word weaving.
For me, I was resonating with what I was talking about yesterday about the distinction between the imaginary and the imaginal. The imaginal is when you're not looking at an image in your mind, you're looking through an image into the world so that you can augment. It's imagination for the sake of perception, not imagination in place of perception, but imagination that enhances perception. The whole point of it is to enhance my perception of something, not to look at the image, but to look through it. The imaginal is when we are turning, like Teague, we're turning our gaze and we're trying to find we're trying to receive the attunement, right? That's what the imaginal is doing. It's trying to augment our gaze. We're sweeping our gaze around and we're trying to, oh, there, right?
And what teaching has had me reveal over the years is the musicality of things. That there's a way in which teaching, I really get the sense of there's like a maestro conducting an orchestra, right? That he's not controlling the orchestra, he's not playing one of the instruments.
He's conducing.
Yeah.
That's the name. Yeah. He's conducing.
The context of the course, right, makes the feedback loops close enough in that you can hear the music a lot more. And it was more like the way electricity conducts through a wire, right? And this back and forth of being a wire, right, and being a maestro, a wire and a maestro, a wire and a maestro, right? Like what is the connection between the two? How are they connected?
Yeah, for me that's the theurgy of it. This is the Neoplatonic element. But these were the ritual practices that were, you conduct them, but the point is you conduct them so that you are conducively open to the gods. This goes back to Teague. They're trying, the conduction is, the musical musical conductor is trying to activate and appreciate and celebrate and thereby cultivate that original capacity for deep receptivity. So think about how music, when it's properly appreciated, can reach deep into your capacity to receive, emergent intelligibility, and how it's imaginal. How you're looking, it's augmenting your ability to perceive the situation, perceive reality.
So if I take a song, right, and I slow it down, you can still hear it as a song, but at some point, if you slow it down enough, there'll be some point where you can't.
Goes outside working memory capacity, so you lose the gestalt.
So you lose the music. Our relationship to time, right?
Yes, right.
Expands or contracts or brings, but there's something going on that moment where it gets close enough where you can hear the melody, and you know, you'd hear say the bass line, right?
Yeah.
You know, it happens once every 4 years, right? Or whatever. And you have this whole relationship to like whatever that is, but you don't feel the sense of it, but there's a weird relationship.
Right.
But then they come together, you hear the musicality, and that's that.
And that's what I think is happening in DiaLogos. I think we're moving back and forth across that horizon. Yes.
There's the horizontal. There's a horizontal slowing down, right, of what's happening in the group, and right there's that sense.
Yeah.
Then there's the verticality music, right? That
exactly, and that,
hear that.
And we slow, and the tempo, we slow it down and speed it up. We slow it down and speed it up.
Bingo. This is so great, John. Thank you for this.
Yeah, this has been wonderful.